What's up, AP Psych? Welcome back. So here we are. We're on our last topic of our development unit. So our last notes section, last notes video for this one. We've only got a few units left, so we're getting down to that end of the year, second half of the year kind of thing. So looking forward to that. Keep working hard, and we'll finish up with adulthood for our development unit. So to start, let's define early and middle adulthood is from about 20 to 65 years old. And I know for many of you, teenagers out there, you're thinking like 65 is middle adulthood. That seems super old to me, right? But considering that, life expectancies are getting up into the 80s, 65 still could be that middle adulthood part, and that's up until about most people retire around that age as well. So let's talk social development of early and middle adulthood. Early adulthood is often centered around careers, right? When we're talking about that concept of identity versus role confusion and generativity, what am I doing? What's my work? Is my work worthwhile? And as you figure that out and you get into your career, there's often a midlife transition around a person's 40s when one starts to question his or her life accomplishments. And that's really that generativity section of the psychosocial stages of development. And it's due mainly to, physical changes and the idea that life's going to end at some point, right? When you're in your 40s, you're hitting that, you're over the hill, right? You're hitting that point where, okay, now maybe I have less life to live than I've already lived. And that can lead people into this midlife transition or midlife crisis where they start to evaluate their life up to that point. However, for most people, the passage into middle adulthood is pretty calm. Instead of focusing on the past or the future, they focus on the present and come to terms with their circumstances and how life is right now. And they work through that and go from there. Also, during this time of early and middle adulthood, many consider marriage, right? Not just marriage, but children and a family if possible. People are still getting married as you get into middle adulthood, but rates of living together and divorce increase a bit. While the institution of marriage is changing in America, around 90% of heterosexual adults will marry, and about 75% of divorcees will remarry. Some recent numbers show about 10% of homosexual adults are married at this point, and about 40 to 50% of first marriages are ending in divorce, right? So there's a lot of different statistics around marriage and how that shapes early and middle adulthood and the decisions that people make as they move through that time period. That's like that intimacy and isolation period, that intimacy versus isolation that Erickson would have referenced in his psychosocial stages of development. As we continue, women's roles have been changing in America for a long time. Close to 75% of all married women with school-age children are working outside the home, which is a massive increase from the past in the United States. Most women working are coming home to do the majority of the housework as well, which shows this kind of like second shift mentality. And according to some sociologists, employed mothers put in an extra month of 24-hour days during the course of the year because they work so hard to support their family, outside the home and inside the home. However, most women who work report a personal satisfaction and sense of contributing to society, right? So they see it as a benefit and they have those feelings of generativity versus stagnation during this period of life. As we enter into late adulthood, 65 plus, there's a lot of physical changes that occur. Okay? Thinning and graying of the hair, some happens earlier than others. Skin wrinkling and a slight loss of height. So those are some big physical things. Your senses are less sensitive. Older people tend to have trouble with hearing, sight, smell, even taste. Your reaction time slows down, and your physical stamina decreases as well. What can cause these changes? So there's a few theories out there about the physical changes as a result of late adulthood. One is genetic programming, and that's the genetic programming theories of aging. It's just like it's a built-in time limit to the reproduction of human cells. Right? As you get older, your cells struggle to reproduce, they struggle to regenerate, and that's kind of what slows you down physically. Right? There's another hypothesis known as the wear and tear theory, which also makes sense. Our mechanical functions of our body simply stop working as efficiently as people age, and eventually the body just wears out, kind of like an old automobile, right? It needs more rest, needs oiled up more, things like that. So it can be a genetic issue, or potentially just you've lived a lot of life at that point. In addition to the physical changes, there are cognitive changes that come with late adulthood as well. So there's some declines in intellectual functioning during late adulthood, not necessarily in everyone, but things like fluid intelligence do show declines in old age. Okay? These are two terms we're going to get to in the intelligence unit, but fluid and crystallized intelligence are important concepts. Fluid is like your problem solving, in the moment, critical thinking skills, and those tend to decline in old age. The processing gets a little bit slower. However, crystallized intelligence, which is your accumulated wealth of knowledge and wisdom over your life, remains steady. So elderly people have that bank of knowledge, the wisdom, but they might struggle to solve problems quickly or think things through with that fluid intelligence decline. All right, how about memory? So we just talked intelligence. Does memory really decline with old age? Most evidence actually says not really. The neural processing, like we just mentioned, does slow down, right? And that's that fluid intelligence, processing things in the moment, which in turn causes it to take longer to process and pull up memories. So it may seem like memory's declining, but really it's just taking a little bit longer to access them. Most memory loss tends to be limited to your episodic memory, the memory of your life events. But other types are largely unaffected, like your semantic memory, declarative, that type of thing. All those different memory pieces that we talked about in that unit, those are largely unaffected. Only your episodic memory seems to be an issue. If a person stays active, though, both physically and mentally, things like playing Scrabble or exercising, memory loss seems almost non-existent. So this is another benefit of exercise and working out your mind. We've seen some recent studies that also say that things like surfing the web for elderly people, investigating the internet, things like that, also aids in neuroprotection to avoid some of these losses as you age. Now, some memory loss is due to disease, such as Alzheimer's and dementia, and those are two different categories that we'll get to down the road. Okay. So we've talked about physical and cognitive changes. The social world of late adulthood also tends to shift. And how does one successfully age is a question here we have during this point in life, where you're getting into that integrity versus despair conflict in Erickson's stages, where you're thinking, have I lived a good life? If you're looking back on it and struggling, things like that are the questions you're trying to answer. So there's two theories here about how you age successfully. There's the disengagement theory of aging. It's an aging process, or aging produces a gradual withdrawal from the world on a physical, psychological, and social level, okay? Which sounds kind of sad, but you kind of pull away from people that you know in your social circles. It's not necessarily a bad thing because disengagement provides opportunity for increased reflection. You're less emotionally invested in other people and relationships at the time when those social relationships will inevitably be ended, right? If your friends are, slowly dying around you, or that, you may be coming close to that point, it may be beneficial for you to, not be as emotionally invested in those type of things. On the flip side, there's the activity theory of aging. And these are people who are most successfully, people who age most successfully are those who maintain those interests, activities, and levels of social interaction they experienced during middle adulthood. Okay, so this is the opposite of the disengagement theory. Right? Instead of pulling away and withdrawing, these people continue to do what they've been doing throughout their adult life, and they show the most happiness as they age. So in this theory, late adulthood should reflect a continuation as much as possible of the activities in which people participated during the earlier part of their life. So if you're an active person, you like to hike or you like to play sports, you can continue to do those things. If you like to play cards with friends, continue doing those things. Those are all going to benefit you as you age. Now, you may think one or the other of these sounds better, but it depends upon the individual, right? If you're an introvert, and you've kind of been that way your whole life, you're probably going to tend to go more toward that disengagement theory. If you're an extrovert and you're somebody who needs that human interaction, that social interaction, you're probably going to lean towards the activity theory of aging. Whichever one you choose, as long as it's done in a healthy way, and it's your decision, that's going to lead to successful aging. So that brings us to our final piece of this adulthood puzzle, and that is another psychologist by the name of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She spent much of her career studying tragedy, death, dying, the cycle of grief, and as it relates to those events. And from her research, she developed these 5 stages of grief that all people face or go through when they experience something tragic. Right? And those 5 stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Okay? Now, it's important to note that a lot of resources out there will tell you that these things happen in order. These are in no particular order, right? As you go through the stages of grief, as you experience something tragic in your life, you may experience these things in a certain order, but you might jump back and forth between them. You may skip entire stages, things like that. It just depends on how you cope and how you go through it. So, that roadmap is not linear. So that's something to keep in mind. These are not in a particular order. Okay. So you can see these stages when you deal with many types of traumas, okay, from learning, someone you love has a terminal illness, dealing with the death of a loved one, the end of a close relationship, the death of a beloved pet, any traumatic experience. All of those things could push you through or into these stages of grief. Okay. And she studied this as people grew and aged and how they grieved around all of those different topics and how they grieved their own, lives as they grew older, and those things came to an end. So this wraps up our adulthood section of our notes. As always, let me know if you have any questions, and we'll see you in class.